David had always been different from other guys his age. While his friends were out at bars trying to meet women, he spent his nights staring at the stars through powerful telescopes. At 35, he worked as a scientist at a research center in the middle of nowhere, Nevada. His job was to listen for signals from space, hoping to find proof that we're not alone in the universe. The problem was, David felt more alone than ever. His last girlfriend had left him 2 years ago, saying she couldn't compete with his obsession with outer space. She wasn't wrong. David would forget dinner dates because he was tracking a mysterious radio signal. He'd cancel weekend trips too. Stay late at the lab when something interesting showed up on his equipment. His coworkers at the research facility had tried to help. They'd set him up on blind dates with their sisters, friends, and even their wives' coworkers. The woman would seem interested at first, but then David would start talking about his work. He'd explain how he has spent his days listening for messages from alien civilizations, and their smiles would fade. They'd make polite excuses and never call back. The worst part was that David knew he was doing it. He couldn't help himself. When he got excited about something, he had to share it. And nothing excited him more than the possibility of making contact with beings from another world. He'd tried dating apps, but his profile was honest about his job and interests. Most women swiped left when they saw he was a scientist who believed in extraterrestrial life. One evening, after another failed date where the woman actually laughed at his job, David sat in his small apartment feeling completely defeated. He lived in a tiny town with a population of maybe 300 people, most of whom worked at the research facility. There weren't many single women around, and the ones who were there had already made it clear they weren't interested in the weird space guy. His best friend Jake, who worked in the computer department at the lab, noticed how miserable David had become.
Ow.
Jake was the kind of guy who always had a solution for everything, even when nobody asked for one. He'd been married to his college sweetheart for 10 years and couldn't understand why. David was having such a hard time finding someone. "Listen," Jake said one day during their lunch break. "I know this sounds crazy, but I heard about this new kind of matchmaking service. It's not like the regular dating websites. This one is supposed to be really advanced, using some kind of special computer program to match people based on deep compatibility." David rolled his eyes. "I've tried every dating app that exists. They don't work for guys like me." "No, this is different," Jake insisted. "My cousin tried it last year. He met his wife through it. Thing is, they don't focus on looks or location. They match people based on personality, values, and life goals. You might not even meet someone from this area. Could be someone from across the country, or even farther." The idea of long-distance dating didn't appeal to David at all. He'd tried it before with a woman from California, and it had been a disaster. But Jake kept pushing, and eventually, David's loneliness won out over his skepticism. The application process was unlike anything David had ever seen. Instead of uploading photos and writing a short bio, he had to answer hundreds of detailed questions. They asked about his childhood, his dreams, his fears, and his deepest beliefs about life and the universe. Some questions seemed strange, like how do you feel about the possibility of life beyond Earth? And would you be willing to change your entire worldview for love? David spent 3 whole evenings filling out the questionnaire. The questions made him think about things he'd never really considered before. What did he want in a partner? What would he be willing to sacrifice for true love? How important was it that someone shared his passion for science? After submitting his application, David waited. The service had told him it might take several weeks to find a suitable match if they found one at all. They warned him that their process was very selective and that not everyone would be matched with someone. 3 weeks later, David received an email that changed everything. Subject line simply read, "We've found someone special for you." Inside, there was a message from someone named Luna. Her words were unlike anything David had ever read in a dating profile or message. She wrote about the beauty of the cosmos, about how she felt connected to the stars, and about her belief that love could transcend any distance or difference. She seemed to understand his passion for space in a way that no one ever had. She didn't think his job was weird or his interests boring. Instead, she asked thoughtful questions about his work and shared her own thoughts about the universe. Luna's messages were poetic, but also intelligent. She could discuss complex scientific concepts. But she also wrote about emotions and connections in ways that made David's heart race. She seemed to know exactly what to say to make him feel understood and valued. The only strange thing was that Luna insisted they could only communicate through written messages. She explained that her situation was complicated and that she couldn't do phone calls or video chats. She lived very far away, she said, and had commitments that made traditional dating impossible. David didn't mind. Their written conversations were more meaningful than any face-to-face conversation he'd ever had. For the first time in his life, he felt like someone truly got him. Someone who didn't think he was strange or obsessed. Someone who shared his wonder about the universe and his hope that there was more to life than what we could see. As weeks turned into months, David found himself falling deeper in love with this mysterious woman he'd never met. Her messages became the highlight of his days. He'd rush home from work to check for new emails from Luna, and he'd stay up late crafting thoughtful responses to her questions and observations. For the first time in years, David felt hopeful about love. Maybe he thought there really was someone out there for everyone, even for a lonely scientist in the middle of the Nevada desert who spent his nights listening for signals from the stars. Over the next 6 months, David's life completely changed. Every morning, he would wake up excited to check his email for messages from Luna. Her words had become like sunshine in his otherwise quiet existence. She didn't just write about every day, things like the weather or what she had for breakfast. Instead, she would share deep thoughts about life, the universe, and dreams that most people never dared to talk about. What amazed David most was how Luna seemed to understand his work better than his own colleagues. When he told her about a particularly challenging problem he was trying to solve with radio telescope data, she would ask questions that helped him think about it in new ways. Sometimes she would even suggest solutions that turned out to be brilliant. David had never met anyone who could discuss quantum physics. One day in poetry, the next, Luna described her own world in ways that painted vivid pictures in David's mind. She talked about a place where the sky danced with colors every night, where people lived in harmony with nature, and where technology and spirituality worked together instead of against each other. She wrote about crystal-clear lakes that reflected stars so perfectly you couldn't tell, where the water ended and the sky began. At first, David thought Luna was just being creative, or maybe describing some remote location on Earth that he'd never heard of. But as their conversations deepened, he began to realize that she was describing something much more extraordinary. The way she talked about her home didn't match anywhere he knew of on our planet. When David asked Luna where exactly she lived, she would give vague answers. She'd say she was from a place very far from where you are, somewhere beyond the mountains and across the vast emptiness. She explained that her people had different ways of measuring distance and time, which made it hard to explain in terms David would understand. The mystery only made David more fascinated. He found himself staying up late into the night writing long messages to Luna about his hopes, fears, and dreams. She responded with equal openness, sharing stories about her own struggles and the challenges she faced in her daily life. She talked about feeling different from others around her, about having responsibilities that sometimes felt overwhelming, and about longing for a connection that transcended the ordinary. What touched David most was how Luna seemed to care about his emotional well-being. When he had a bad day at work or felt frustrated with his research, she would write messages that comforted him in ways that no one ever had. She didn't just say, "I'm sorry you're having a tough time." Instead, she would write about resilience, about how challenges help us grow, and about how the universe has a way of bringing meaningful experiences into our lives when we need them most. Luna also shared her own wisdom about love and relationships. She wrote about how true connection wasn't about being in the same physical space, but about minds and hearts that could reach across any distance to touch each other. She believed that souls could recognize each other regardless of the barriers that might separate them. David's friends at the research facility began to notice changes in him. He smiled more often, seemed more energetic, and even started taking better care of himself. Jake, who had suggested the matchmaking service, was amazed by the transformation. "You're like a different person," Jake told him one day. "This Luna must be something special." David tried to explain how incredible their connection was, but he realized that most people wouldn't understand. How could he tell them that he was falling in love with someone he'd never seen or spoken to? How could he describe the way Luna's messages made him feel understood in ways that face-to-face conversations never had? But David's family was worried. During his weekly phone calls with his sister, she would ask questions about Luna that David couldn't answer. Where did she work? What did she look like? When was he going to meet her? David's vague responses only made his sister more concerned. "David, you don't even know if this person is real," his sister said during one particularly tense conversation. "People can pretend to be anyone online. How do you know you're not being tricked?" David understood her concerns, but he also knew that what he felt for Luna was real. Her messages showed a depth of character and intelligence that couldn't be faked. She remembered every detail of their conversations, asked thoughtful follow-up questions about things he'd mentioned weeks earlier, shared vulnerabilities that no one would fake. As months passed, David began to feel like he knew Luna better than he'd ever known anyone. They had discussed everything from their childhood memories to their deepest philosophical beliefs. Luna had a way of asking questions that made David examine his own thoughts and feelings more carefully. One evening, Luna's message took an unexpected turn. She wrote about feeling constrained by the circumstances of her life and the rules that governed her world. She explained that her people had strict customs about relationships and that she was taking a big risk by continuing to communicate with David. "There are protocols I'm supposed to follow," she wrote. "Ways of doing things that have been established for generations. But my feelings for you are stronger than any rule or tradition. I think about you constantly, and I dream of a life where we could be together without these barriers." David felt his heart racing as he read her words. Luna was talking about love in a way that made it clear she felt the same deep connection he did. But her message also hinted at complications he didn't fully understand. Luna went on to explain that in her culture, relationships weren't casual things. When two people decided to be together, it was a commitment that involved not just them, but their entire communities. She couldn't simply pack up and move to be with David like someone from his world might do. "If we're going to be together," Luna wrote, "it would have to be under the terms that my people would accept. I know this might sound strange to you, but would you be willing to make a commitment to me without us meeting first? Do you trust our connection enough to take that kind of leap?" David stared at his computer screen for a long time after reading those words. Luna was asking him to consider something that went against everything he'd been taught about relationships. But as he thought about the months they'd spent getting to know each other, he realized that he already knew Luna better than he'd known anyone he'd ever dated in person. The question was whether he was brave enough to trust in something that seemed impossible, or whether he would let fear keep him from the most meaningful connection he'd ever experienced. As David sat in his quiet apartment, surrounded by the vastness of the Nevada desert, he realized that sometimes the biggest risks led to the most extraordinary rewards. David spent 3 sleepless nights thinking about Luna's question. The idea of committing to someone he'd never met went against everything logical in his mind. But his heart kept telling him that what they shared was deeper than anything physical appearance could offer. He knew Luna's thoughts, her dreams, her fears, and her hopes better than he'd ever known anyone. Finally, David typed the words that would change his life forever. "Yes, I trust what we have. I'm ready to take that leap with you." Luna's response came faster than usual. Her message was filled with joy and relief, but also detailed explanations about what would happen next. She explained that her people had very specific customs for joining 2 lives together. The ceremony would need to happen according to their traditions, which might seem strange to David but were deeply meaningful to her culture. "I know this will sound unusual," Luna wrote, "but our wedding ceremony must take place under the open sky when the moon is dark. My people believe that new beginnings should happen when the heavens are clear of all light except the stars. This allows the universe to bless our union without any interference." David felt his stomach flutter with nervous excitement. Luna was talking about their actual wedding, not just an engagement. In her culture, apparently, the decision to commit was the same as deciding to marry. There was no long engagement period, or months of planning like in his world. Luna provided specific instructions that seemed to come from another time or place entirely. David was to go to a particular location in the Nevada desert, coordinates that she provided with mathematical precision. He was to arrive exactly at midnight on the night when the moon would be completely dark. He should wear simple white clothing and bring only a plain ring as a symbol of their commitment. No one else can be present, Luna explained. This is how my people have always done these ceremonies. It must be just us and the universe as our witness. I know your family and friends will want to celebrate with you later, but the actual joining must be private and sacred. David's hand shook as he read her instructions. This was really happening. He was going to marry Luna, and he still didn't even know what she looked like. When he told Jake about his plans, his friend thought David had completely lost his mind. You seriously going to marry someone you've never seen? Jake asked, pacing around David's apartment. What if she's not who you think she is? What if this is all some kind of trick? David understood his friend's concern, but he also felt a certainty in his heart that he couldn't explain. Jake, I know this sounds crazy, but I feel like I've been waiting my whole life for Luna. Our connection is real. I can feel it in every message she sends. His sister was even more upset when David called to tell her about his decision. Begged him to reconsider, to at least meet Luna in person before making such a huge commitment. But David's mind was made up. He had found something rare and precious, and he wasn't going to let fear destroy it. The days leading up to the ceremony passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. David bought a simple white shirt and pants, along with a plain silver ring that felt right in his hand. He told his supervisor at work that he needed a personal day, making up a story about a family emergency. As the night of the new moon approached, David felt a mixture of excitement and terror, unlike anything he'd ever experienced. He was about to marry the woman he loved, but he was also stepping into the complete unknown. Luna's final message before the ceremony was brief, but filled with emotion. Tomorrow night, we begin our new life together. I can't wait to finally be with you. The drive to the desert location took David about an hour from his apartment. Coordinates Luna had given him lead to a spot that was completely isolated, miles from any road or building. It's David's headlights cut through the darkness. He wondered how Luna had even known about this place. When he arrived at the exact coordinates, David almost couldn't believe what he saw. In the middle of the empty desert, there was a small structure that seemed to glow with a soft, warm light. It wasn't like any building David had ever seen. The walls appeared to be made of some kind of translucent material that pulsed gently, creating patterns of light that moved like slow waves. David parked his car and walked toward the glowing structure, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. The night was perfectly silent, except for the sound of his footsteps. On the desert sand, above him, the stars were brighter than he'd ever seen them, creating a canopy of light that made him feel both small and part of something infinite. As he got closer to the structure, David could see a figure waiting inside. The person was wearing flowing white robes that seemed to move in a wind that David couldn't feel. Their face was covered by a veil that shimmered like water, making it impossible to see any features clearly. David assumed this was Luna, but something felt different than he'd expected. The figure seemed taller than he'd imagined, and there was something about their presence that made the air around them feel charged with energy. When David stepped inside the glowing structure, he felt a tingling sensation on his skin. It's like static electricity, but warmer and more pleasant. Another figure emerged from the shadows. It's one clearly an officiant of some kind. They wore robes, similar to Luna's, but in deeper colors that seemed to shift between blue and purple, depending on how the light hit them. The officiant began speaking in a language David had never heard before. But somehow, the words felt familiar, like a song he'd known in childhood, but had forgotten. The ceremony itself was unlike anything David had ever witnessed. The officiant's voice rose and fell in patterns that seemed to match the pulsing of the structure's walls. David found himself repeating phrases in the strange language, words that felt right on his tongue even though he didn't understand their meaning. When it came time to exchange rings, Luna extended her hand toward David as their fingers touched. He felt a shock of recognition that went beyond the physical. Her hand was smooth and cool, but there was an energy in her touch that made every nerve in his body come alive. David slipped the ring onto Luna's finger, and she placed one on his. That seemed to have appeared from nowhere. The ring fit perfectly and felt warm against his skin, as if it had been made specifically for him. Throughout the entire ceremony, Luna never spoke and never removed her veil. David longed to see her face, to look into her eyes and confirm that the woman he'd fallen in love with through her words was really standing beside him. But he respected what she'd told him about her people's customs, trusting that everything would be revealed in time. As the ceremony concluded, the officiant made a gesture that seemed to encompass both David and Luna and the structure's walls, pulsed brighter for a moment before returning to their gentle glow. David felt a sense of completion, as if something that had been missing from his life had finally fallen into place. Luna handed David a small piece of paper and gestured toward the exit. As they stepped outside, she pointed toward his car and then toward the horizon, making it clear that he should return home. David wanted to stay with her, to finally have the conversation they'd been building toward for months. But he understood that she needed time to prepare for their new life together. The note in his hand explained that she would come to his home the following evening, and that's when their real journey as husband and wife would begin. As David drove back through the desert, his new ring catching the light from his dashboard, he realized that he had just crossed a threshold into a completely new chapter of his life. Tomorrow night, he would finally meet his wife face to face, and he had no idea what to expect. David barely slept that night, kept staring at the ring on his finger, trying to process what had happened in the desert. The ceremony felt like a dream, but the weight of the ring reminded him it was real. He was married now, to a woman he'd never seen, and tomorrow evening, she would finally reveal herself to him. The next day at work dragged on forever. David couldn't concentrate on his research. Every few minutes, he'd check his phone, hoping for a message from Luna, but nothing came. His colleagues noticed his distracted behavior. David couldn't explain what was going on without sounding completely insane. Jake stopped by David's desk around lunchtime, looking worried. "You actually went through with it, didn't you?" asked, noticing the ring. "You really married her?" David nodded, still not entirely believing it himself. "I know you think I'm crazy, but Jake, I've never been more sure of anything in my life. What Luna and I have is real. Tonight I'll finally get to see her, and everything will make sense." Jake shook his head but didn't argue. He'd learned that when David made up his mind about something, there was no changing it. "Just be careful, okay? And call me if you need anything." The afternoon seemed to last forever. David left work early. Going home to clean his apartment and prepare for Luna's arrival, he had no idea what to expect. Would she be tall or short? What color would her hair be? Would she look anything like he'd imagined during their months of correspondence? As evening approached, David's nervousness grew. He changed clothes 3 times, unable to decide what to wear for this monumental moment. Finally, he settled on a simple button-down shirt and jeans, wanting to look nice but not overly formal. At exactly 7 o'clock, David heard a soft knock on his door. His heart started racing so fast, he thought it might burst. This was it. After all these months of wondering he was finally going to meet his wife face to face, David walked to the door, his hands trembling as he reached for the handle. He took a deep breath, trying to calm himself, then opened the door. The woman standing on his doorstep was the most beautiful person David had ever seen. But something was immediately different about her. Her beauty wasn't normal human beauty. There was something otherworldly about the way she looked. Her skin seemed to glow with a soft, inner light, like moonlight shining through water. Her hair was long and dark, but it moved in ways that defied gravity, floating around her face as if she were underwater. Her eyes were the most striking feature. They were larger than normal human eyes and seemed to hold depths of starlight. Within them, David's mouth fell open and he took a step backward. Luna smiled at his reaction, but even her smile was different. It was warm and genuine, but there was something ancient and wise about it that made David feel like he was looking at someone who had lived for centuries. "Hello, David," she said. And her voice was exactly as he'd imagined it would be, soft, melodic, and filled with kindness. "I know this is probably a shock for you. May I come in?" David nodded, still unable to speak. He stepped aside, and Luna entered his apartment. She walked past him. David caught a scent that reminded him of night air and distant stars. It was pleasant, but unlike any perfume he'd ever smelled. Luna sat down on his couch, and David noticed that she moved with an unusual grace, as if she were floating rather than walking. She patted the cushion beside her, inviting him to sit down. "I know you have questions," Luna said gently, "and I promised I would answer them honestly once we were married. The truth is, David, I'm not from your world." David felt like his brain was trying to process information that didn't make sense. "Do you mean not from my world?" Luna looked at him with those incredible eyes, and David could see both sadness and hope in them. "I mean, I'm not human, David. I'm from a place very far from Earth. My people have been watching your planet for many generations, studying your species and learning about your ways." David's first instinct was to laugh, thinking this had to be some kind of joke. But looking at Luna's obviously non-human features, he realized she was completely serious. "You're saying you're an alien?" "That's the word your people use." "Yes," Luna said. "My people call ourselves the Keepers. We've been observing Earth for thousands of your years, but we've never made direct contact with humans before. You're part of something new, David. Something that's never been tried before." David stood up and started pacing around his living room. This was too much to process. "So when you said you were from far away, you meant like ... space. Another planet?" "Yes," Luna said simply. "My home is in a star system that your astronomers haven't discovered yet. We've been using advanced technology to monitor Earth's development, waiting for the right time to make contact." David stopped pacing and looked at her. Despite the shocking revelation, he found that his feelings for Luna hadn't changed. If anything, seeing her in person had made his love for her even stronger. "But why me? Why did you choose to contact me?" Luna's expression became more serious. "Your work, David. You've spent your whole life searching for proof that life exists. Beyond Earth, your open mind and your genuine desire to connect with other forms of life made you a perfect candidate for our experiment." "Experiment?" David felt a chill run down his spine. "Are you saying our relationship is just an experiment to you?" Luna quickly shook her head, and for the first time, David saw real emotion in her eyes. "No, David. It started as an assignment, but it became something much more. I was supposed to study human emotions and behavior by forming a connection with someone from your world, and I never expected to actually fall in love with you." She stood up and walked toward him, and David noticed that her feet barely seemed to touch the ground. "My people don't experience emotions the way humans do. We're more logical, more controlled. But you changed that for me, David. You made me feel things I never knew were possible." David looked into her eyes and saw the same person he'd fallen in love with through her messages. Alien or not, this was still Luna. This was still the woman who understood him better than anyone ever had. "So what happens now?" David asked. "Do you have to go back to your people? Are you in trouble for falling in love with a human?" Luna's expression became worried. "That's complicated. My superiors weren't happy when I told them about my feelings for you. They wanted to end the experiment and erase your memories of our contact. But I convinced them to let us try something different." She reached out and took David's hands in hers. Her touch was cool but comforting, and David felt that same electric connection he'd felt during their wedding ceremony. "They're giving us a choice, David. I can stay here with you, but it would mean giving up my old life completely. Or you could come with me to my world and become the first human ambassador to my people. Either way, we'd be together, but it would change everything about the life you've known." David looked at this incredible woman who had somehow found her way into his heart across the vast emptiness of space. She was offering him the chance to live out his greatest dream, to make contact with an alien civilization. But more than that, she was offering him a love that was literally out of this world. "And if I say no?" David asked. "If I decide this is too much for me to handle?" Luna's eyes filled with something that looked like tears, though they seemed to sparkle more than human tears. Then I would have to return to my people, and they would remove all memories of our contact from your mind. You would go back to your old life as if none of this ever happened. David realized that he was standing at the most important crossroads of his life. He could choose safety and return to his lonely but familiar existence. Or he could take the biggest leap of faith imaginable and trust in a love that defied everything he thought he knew about the universe. As he looked at Luna's beautiful, otherworldly face, David knew that some decisions were too important to make with logic alone. This was a moment that required him to follow his heart, no matter where it might lead him. David sat down heavily on his couch, trying to process everything Luna had just told him. His wife was an alien from another world. Their relationship had started as an experiment. And now he had to make a decision that would change his entire life. The weight of the choice felt overwhelming. I need to understand something, David said, looking at Luna's glowing features. When you say you fell in love with me, how do I know that's real? How do I know this isn't still part of your experiment? Luna's eyes showed genuine hurt at his question, but she nodded as if she understood why he had to ask. David, my people can control many things, but they cannot control emotions. When I started corresponding with you, I was following a script, asking questions that my superiors had prepared. But after the first few weeks, I stopped using their guidelines. She moved closer to him on the couch, and David could feel the strange energy that seemed to radiate from her skin. Every message I sent you after that first month came from my heart. When you told me about your difficult day at work, I genuinely wanted to comfort you. When you shared your dreams about discovering life beyond Earth, I felt excited because I knew I could make those dreams come true. David searched her face, looking for any sign of deception. But all he saw was the same kindness and intelligence that had drawn him to her messages in the first place. So what exactly are you offering me? What would my life be like if I chose to be with you? Luna's expression became more animated as she began to explain. If you come with me to my world, you would be the first human to ever see our civilization. You would learn technologies that your Earth won't discover for hundreds of years. You could help build a bridge between our peoples, becoming an ambassador. For human-alien relations, she gestured around his small apartment, but it would mean leaving all of this behind. Your job, your friends, your family, everything familiar. You would be starting completely over in a place where you would be the only human among billions of my people. David felt his heart racing at the possibilities she was describing. This was beyond his wildest dreams as a scientist. To actually visit an alien world, to learn about their technology and culture. To be part of the most important moment in human history, it was everything he'd ever wanted. But what if I'm not ready for that? David asked. What if I wanted you to stay here instead? Could you do that? Luna nodded slowly. Yes, I could stay on Earth. My people have technology that would allow me to appear completely human when needed. I could live here as your wife, and no one would ever know the truth about what I really am. She paused, and David could see the conflict in her eyes. But David, if I stay here, it would mean cutting myself off from my people forever. I could never go home again. And there would always be the risk that other members of my species might come looking for me. David stood up and walked to his window, looking out at the night sky. Somewhere up there was Luna's home world, a place he could never have imagined just days ago. The stars that he'd spent his whole life studying suddenly seemed closer and more real than ever before. Tell me about your world, David said. Would it be like to live there? Luna joined him at the window, and together they looked up at the stars. My planet is larger than Earth, with 3 moons that create the most beautiful light shows across our skies every night. Our cities are built in harmony with nature. We grow our buildings rather than constructing them, using living materials that respond to our needs. Her voice became dreamy as she described her home. We have oceans that are crystal clear for thousands of feet down, filled with creatures that create their own light. Our people live much longer than humans. I'm actually quite young by our standards, even though I would be considered ancient by yours. David turned to face her. How old are you exactly? By your counting, I'm about 250 years old, Luna said with a small smile. But I'm still considered to be in the early stages of my adult life. The age difference should have been shocking, but somehow it didn't bother David. After everything else he'd learned tonight, it seemed like a minor detail. And your people would accept me, even though I'm human? That's part of why this decision is so important, Luna explained. If you came with me and our relationship succeeded, it would prove to my people that humans and our species can coexist peacefully. It could open the door for future contact between our worlds. She took his hands again, and David felt that electric connection that seemed to flow between them. But if you chose to stay on Earth and I stayed with you, it would send a different message. It would show that love can transcend species and worlds. That sometimes personal happiness is more important than politics and procedures. David realized that his decision wasn't just about his own future. It could affect the relationship between two entire species. The weight of that responsibility felt enormous. What do you want, Luna? David asked. If you could choose without worrying about your people or mine, what would make you happiest? Luna's eyes filled with those sparkling tears again. I want to be with you, David. I don't care if that's on Earth, on my world, or floating somewhere in space between them. You've shown me what love feels like, and I never want to lose that. David pulled her close, and as he held her, he felt a sense of rightness that he'd never experienced before. This was his wife, the woman he'd fallen in love with, through her words and her thoughts. The fact that she was from another world just made their connection even more miraculous. I have one more question, David said. If I choose to go with you, could I ever come back to Earth? Could I visit my family and friends? Luna nodded. Our technology would allow for travel between worlds, though it wouldn't be easy or frequent. You could return to Earth occasionally, but it would become less and less meaningful to you as time passed. My world would become your home. David walked around his apartment one more time, looking at all the things that had made up his life. Until now. His books about astronomy, his photos of family and friends, his simple furniture and familiar possessions. All of it suddenly seemed small compared to what Luna was offering him. He thought about his job at the research facility, spending his nights listening for signals from space that he now knew existed. He thought about his lonely apartment, and his failed relationships with women who couldn't understand his passion for the unknown. Then he looked at Luna, this incredible being who had traveled across space to find him, who had risked everything from her own world to be with him. She represented everything he'd ever dreamed of discovering. But more than that, she represented a love that was deeper than anything he'd ever imagined possible. David realized that his whole life had been leading up to this moment. Every night, he'd spent staring at the stars. Every failed relationship. Every lonely evening wondering if there was someone out there for him. It had all been preparing him for this choice. Luna, David said, taking her hands in his, I've spent my entire life searching for proof that we're not alone in the universe. I never imagined that proof would come in the form of someone who would love me. You're not just from another world, you are my world now. He looked into her starlit eyes and smiled. I want to go with you. I want to see your planet meet your people and help build a bridge between our species. But most of all, I want to wake up every morning next to the most amazing woman in any galaxy. Luna's face lit up with joy that seemed to make her glow even brighter. Are you sure, David? Once we leave Earth, your old life will be over forever. David nodded without hesitation. My real life is just beginning. Everything that came before was just practice for this moment. As Luna wrapped her arms around him, David felt like he was finally home. Was about to embark on the greatest adventure any human had ever experienced. Was traveling to worlds beyond imagination with the love of his life by his side. The lonely scientist who had spent his nights listening for signals from space had found something far more valuable than proof of alien life. He had found love that transcended worlds, and together with Luna, he was ready to explore a universe full of infinite possibilities.